Okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, I graduated from high school in the spring of 1952. And of course, Grandma and I were going together um, for all through high school. So when I got out of high school, my dad was very poor health. He wanted me to go farming. I had told you about a scholarship I could have gotten. I think I told you about that. But it just didn't work out to do that. So anyway, we graduated together, and um, I went to farming, and I decided that your grandma came to me and she says, "I think I'm going to go to college over in Michigan." She wanted to go to Spring Arbor College. It was a Free Methodist college over in Michigan, in Spring Arbor. So I thought, well, I'm not so sure I like that idea, because I figured she'd get over there with all those college guys and see somebody else she kind of liked. So I told her, I said, I think we just ought to get married. And she was a little taken aback by that, but yeah, she kind of agreed that it was okay. So I talked to my folks, and my dad had kind of had a yen to go to Florida. So if he thought, well, gee, if he has a wife, why, maybe that'll be a little easier for me and my mother Ruth, to go to Florida. My dad his name was Ross, and he thought, oh, yeah, Ross and Ruth can go to Florida, and he can take care of the farm. So
They wanted to go down there for good, or just
no, they just
for
wanted to go down
vacation?
there and spend the winters,
All the winters.
because they just got tired of the winters in Wisconsin, like a lot of people do over time. Yeah, they a lot of people would go south. Okay, anyway, so at the we agreed we would get married, so she planned her wedding, and we got married the following September. So we were both 18 years old when we got married, and I will tell you, I thought I knew what love was. I didn't. I was going to learn, and I thought I knew I thought I had figured out what married life would be like, and I was wrong. And it was fine. It was great, and we had a great time. And some of the things that kind of helped us along were Jean's folks we'd go up to their place on Saturday nights when we were first married. Now, we didn't have any kids, but before I better back up just a minute, because right after we got married, I took Grandma, I took her, and we went on a honeymoon out to Washington D.C. and up through Maine, and I think we got to Maine just about, and up through the Northeast, and then we came down, and one of the prettiest drives I've ever been on, we were on the Skyline Drive coming out of Washington D.C. Trees were turning right at that time, and it was just gorgeous.
So was that right after the wedding that you went out there?
Yeah, it was right after the wedding. I had a 1947 Plymouth, and that's part of the story. So we took off, and of course I'd never traveled by myself. I traveled with my folks, and she'd never traveled, so it was a new experience for us, So we took a honeymoon. We drove out through Virginia and out and down, and we were gone for a little over a week. But about 5 days or 6 days into our honeymoon, she had an appendicitis attack, and she just was in terrible shape and in pain. And so I said, well, we better find a doctor in a hospital. And she said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm going home. I want you to get me home. So we started for home, and we got to just about Indiana on our way home. and the brakes went out on my old 47 Plymouth. We'd been in the mountains out east, and I'd used the brakes a lot. Well, I don't know whether I burned them out or what, but anyway, they gave up. So I didn't have any brakes, no brakes. The pedal would go clear to the floor and there's nothing. And so I said, well, I gotta see about getting these brakes fixed. She's wailing, laying in the seat wailing as I'm traveling, coming home, and we never stopped. We stayed in Westchester, Virginia, and I'll never forget that because the water was terrible. And we stayed in Westchester, Virginia, and then we started from there to come home. And we started, and like I said, I came across Ohio, and the brakes went out, and then I got into Indiana. And we had to come up through Chicago, and of course there were no interstates then. So we had to drive Highway 12, and I said, well, where do you want to go? And she said, just get me to Elkhorn, because her doctor, Dr. Truex, was in Elkhorn. That's where he practiced. And she wanted to go to the Elkhorn Hospital. That's where she'd always gone. Her folks lived over in that area, or lived further east, and so they always went to Elkhorn or Darien. He was in Darien as a practicing doctor. Well, I'll tell you, it was something else, because she had lived in Chicago for several years. So we're coming through Chicago, and I would say to her, okay, we're in this area now, how many stoplights are there? Because I didn't have any brakes. I had to use the emergency brake, and finally that gave up. And so I had no brakes at all. I had to stop the car. By shifting it down. So I would shift down I'd slow down and shift down to a lower gear, and then down to a crawl, and hope the car stopped by the time I needed to stop. That's the way I drove for probably 200 miles in traffic. If you can imagine driving with no brakes, it's just a miracle we got here. And so when we got to Elkhorn, I remember I was in such a hurry that I went right up over the curb and out onto the lawn because I couldn't stop. And they brought a gurney out of the hospital, and I had stopped long enough to call ahead to the doctor, and he was waiting for us, and they put her right in surgery and took her appendix out. It's just a miracle that it didn't break.
Yeah. Did she know that that's what was wrong?
Well, she was pretty sure that's what it was.
Yeah.
She was pretty sure. But I had no idea what it was. All I know is that she was in terrible pain. But she just, where the pain was, she thought it was her appendix. Either that or a gallbladder. But it wound up to be, she was right, it was her appendix. So they took that out. So our life together started with a real bang, because she wound up in the hospital, and I got introduced to life in the real world because I got handed a bill for several $100s for an appendectomy that I wasn't expecting and hadn't budgeted for. So it's a nice way to start out,
Yeah.
So anyway, well then.
I have something. When you were talking about the engagement and you said, I think we should get married, was there more to it than that? Did you propose in any certain way? Did you talk to her parents?
Yes.
Did you have a ring?
Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, I'll back up and tell you about the ring. I went down to a jewelry store in Janesville and bought the ring for our wedding, for her an engagement ring and a wedding ring that matched.
So did you do that before you talked to her?
I did that. I did that when she agreed. I proposed to her. It was on it was one night when she was at the farm, and I forget what we were doing. And I said to her, it looks like you've got two choices right now, and I'll give you the two choices and see what you think. And I said, choice number one is to go to college and probably find somebody different, and we may never connect. That's choice number one. Or choice number two is I've got a ring. Well, I wasn't quite truthful because I didn't have it yet, but I was going to get it if she agreed. I got a ring, and we could get married this fall, and you can come and you can be my wife, and I'd like that if you would be. And she just broke down and said, okay.
Did it take much convincing?
No, it didn't take a lot of convincing. No. You know, I really was pretty good at convincing her. And so she agreed, and so that's how it all took place. Well, then I had to go and talk to her dad. I went and talked to her dad and mother, because obviously, you know, we were both pretty young, and so I went and talked to them, and her mother was all for it. I mean, I was amazed, you know, because, you know, it's her only daughter, but her mother and I, let's put it this way, her mother and I really clicked, and Crete, her mother always had a good warm spot for me, which was pretty lucky, because then I had the house wired, you know, and always could figure out what was going on. And her dad, he wasn't nearly as much in favor of it, but I think Crete, you know, that Rex and Crete were their names, Rex Addy and Crete Addy, and I think Crete kind of talked to Rex and said, hey, you know, a lot of things can happen if she goes off to school. So I think she kind of worked on him a little bit, because he finally came around, and then we got, you know, obviously we got married in September. Mm-hmm. But I just knew that if she got over there at that college with all those college dudes, that I was out of luck. You know, she'd find somebody over there that she liked. Yeah. So I figured, well, we've just got to curb that. You know, we just gotta cut that off at the pass.
So she didn't help pick out the engagement ring?
No.
At all? You picked it out yourself?
Oh, I got to tell you the story. I went and picked it out, and I didn't have a lot of money, so I went and picked it out, and my dad was a very conservative guy, and I mean, he really watched his money very carefully all his life. And so I came home. Dad said, I picked out a ring, and I picked out a set, and I came home and I showed it to my dad, and my dad says, nope. I said, what do you mean? He says, that's not what you're going to get. Okay, why? He says, it's not good enough. He said, if you're going to marry a girl, you only do it once. You go with a nice ring and a nice wedding ring. Nice. And I said, well, I can't afford that. He said, doesn't make any difference. That's what you're going to get. So he went with me. Actually, I was really shocked. My dad had funny ways, but boy, he just said that to a girl, getting married is too important to be using a cheap ring. And I bought a cheap one, you know, it was very inexpensive, because I couldn't afford it. And I figured, well, so what? We're going to still be married. No, that wasn't good enough. So we went down, and my dad picked out a set that cost 4 times what I picked out. And he said, I'll give you the money. You can pay me back over time. And so that's the one I got. And she just loved it, you know. But the actual time that I asked her to marry me, we were still going to school. We were still in high school, because I gave her the ring, because, you know, it was our senior year and she was making college plans. So I got the engagement ring and gave it to her at Christmas, the year that we graduated. So the plans for getting married were not made after we got out of school. They were made still while we were in school, because I gave her the diamond, the engagement ring, while we were still in high school. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I held on to the matching wedding ring until we got married. But and then she went and got the matching male or my wedding ring for when when we had exchange of rings at our wedding. So I had a ring and it matched the set.
So what did her rings end up costing?
They cost her $350.
Oh wow.
Yeah, wow. And I'm telling you, John, $350 in 1952 was a lot of money, considering I had bought a good used car for $695. You figure 300, that's half what I paid for a car.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. But that's what, my dad wanted. He said, you're going to get her a good ring. You're going to get her a quality ring. Well, that ring today would be $2,000 or $2,500. It was a expensive, what would be considered an expensive ring then. The one I had picked out was less than $100. I had a set that was less than $100. And he takes me back in and makes me pay 4 times that pretty near. And I didn't forget that right away. That's a lot of money. So, and it took me a long time to pay it off. I was paying my dad off. I think probably took me a year and a half to pay that ring off. Of course, I never told her that he financed it.
Yeah.
But boy, I thought, wow, I didn't want to spend that money, but he just wouldn't put up. That's one time he just put his foot down and said, no, you're going to spend more. And my dad spending more was just never in his line of thinking. It was always how not cheap, but how inexpensive can we get by? So. But we got married and we went on our honeymoon and we had our episode on our honeymoon, and then we come home. So we started life off interestingly.
What was the date you got married?
September 6th, 1952.
Was that a Saturday?
It was a Saturday.
Where was it at?
It was at the Rock Prairie United Presbyterian Church.
What was the service like?
Oh, it was, my uncle married us, my Uncle Walter. And I don't know whether we had, and then the regular pastor, I think his name was Reginald White, that was there at that time. And so I had 2 uncles, both of which were pastors in the Methodist Church, Uncle Ralph and Uncle Walter. And so Uncle Walter performed the ceremony, and it's on a recording somewhere. I don't know where that is, but anyway, but it was a nice service.
Were there a lot of people there?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of people. Yeah. And my best friend from high school stood up with me, and my sister stood up with Jean, and it was in the afternoon, and then we went down near Chicago, spent our wedding night. I had gotten a room at a hotel down near Chicago, and then we took off on our honeymoon. And I remember our wedding day, my dad was trying to get as much work done as he could before I left, because he knew I was going to leave. So I poured concrete all morning on my wedding day, and we put in a concrete slab because we were going to put in some bunks for feeding the cattle, and so I poured cement on my wedding morning, and I was pretty tired that night, but we had a great time. I mean, she was we just thought an awful lot of each other.
Did you buy a suit for the wedding?
Yep, first suit I ever owned.
Yeah.
I've never had a suit in my life. I've never had a tie. So I had a suit and a tie that I got for the wedding. And she got her wedding dress out of New York. Her wedding dress was extremely expensive because her dad wanted her to have the best wedding dress that he could find. So I've got a picture. Our wedding picture is here, and you could get a picture of it if you wanted to include that.
Yeah.
as part of this. It's hanging on the wall in the bedroom.
Yeah, I could do that maybe at the end, get some
Yeah.
footage of some different pictures.
Yeah. So that's how we ended up our honeymoon. We came back and I started farming with my
just
dad.
got to work.
What?
Just got to work when you got back?
Yep, just went to work when I got back.
Did Grandma work?
My mother, no, Jean did not work.
Yeah.
No, she just, I worked, and we lived in an 8-foot by 30-foot house trailer that was set up for living in the backyard of our house. We moved in there, and that was our first home when we got back from our honeymoon,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we lived. And my folks had pulled that trailer back and forth to Florida for a few years. No, not then. I don't remember just how that. They had another one that they pulled to Florida. That one was set up in the back, and I don't remember what the circumstances were to why that was set up in the backyard. See, when I was born a quarter of a mile west of Emerald Grove Road, or a quarter of a mile west of the church where we got married. Then we moved a quarter of a mile east. So it was, or about a little less than a quarter of a mile east, and that's where I lived from we moved there. We moved to that farm in 1940. We moved there in 1942 during the World War II, and that's where I lived, and that's where I grew up, and so that's where I went farming. It was a 160-acre farm, and so when I got after our honeymoon, I just started farming. I started farming on that land with my dad, and I farmed what they called on thirds. And thirds were that you got a third of the income. He furnished the machinery and the cattle, and I furnished the labor. So it was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 for the machinery, 1/3 for the cattle, and then as the cattle grew up and had offspring, I got a third of those, and eventually I worked my way up to where I bought into the other third of the cattle and the machinery, and I bought all the machinery and then went on halves, what they call halves. And what that means is that the landlord gets half and you get half for running the farm. Mm-hmm. That was the way farms were rented years ago. Some of them, there are still farms that are rented that way. They have a tenant on the farm, and the person that does the work gets half the income, and the person that owns the farm gets half the income, pays half the expenses, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way it was done. So that's the way I started farming. Started farming on third, and boy, I tell you, it was tough going, John. It was tough going. I mean, I think my milk checks were about $60 to $80 a month. That's what I got for an income. So it wasn't that's why it took me so long to pay off that wedding ring. And that's why that was such a big bill, because there were several months of income that I was looking at to pay that off. But, I paid it off like $10 a month, and that was fine with my dad, just pay it off. It's okay with him. So then we went farming, and we didn't have any children for 3 years.
Yeah, what was life like as newlyweds before kids came?
It was just kind of a mundane thing. We farmed, and she would cook my meals. Well, then my folks went to Florida. In the winter, they left about November, and then they didn't come back till April. So they were gone for about 5 months. And they pulled a trailer. They bought another trailer, and they had another trailer, and they went down and lived in that in Florida. And I farmed the farm, and we had cattle. We had about 16 or 18 cows, and I raised some pigs. And so that's what I did. That was my livelihood. We farmed. Well, during the course, over that over that, it was about 3 years later, we got married in 52, and in 1955, Brian was born. That was my oldest son, and from 1952 to 1955, we just had a lot of fun. We did some wild things. There was a couple that stood up. His name was Jerry Hilton. He's passed away now, but Jerry was my best man, and his wife Joan was one of Gene's best friends in school. So we chummed around. We did things together, and they'd come out there and they'd come out in the evening, and we'd play cards, and we'd go to their house and play cards. But Saturday nights were special. We'd go to Gene's folks and watch Sid Caesar on television. Rex got one of the very first televisions I ever saw. Television hadn't even been out yet. You know, television came along about in 1949, but they were so blooming expensive, I couldn't even think about a television.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have one. We just had a radio. So we'd go up on Saturday night and watch the Sid Caesar program, and that was a big deal. We'd go up there and have chocolate malts and cake and popcorn and watch Sid Caesar. Then on Sundays, we would go to church, and we would attend church, and then after church we'd go up there for lunch to her folks, and so we would be up there during the afternoon, and we would, you know, the television was just such a big deal. I mean, seeing pictures on a machine like that was just really intriguing. It was about a 12-inch, had about a 12-inch screen, and black and white, and snow all over it. I mean, it was great for us because we'd never had it before, but it certainly wasn't very good quality.
Yeah.
You know, and then on Sunday nights we'd watch the Ed Sullivan Show. I always remember that. They had the Ed Sullivan Show, which was an old program where they'd have talent come in. Had Elvis Presley come on to sing, and I mean, some of this old talent, you know, Johnny Cash and some of these old country western singers, and we really enjoyed that. We'd go up there. So the way it would work is Sunday after we'd get out of church, we would go up there, have lunch, and then we'd spend the afternoon. Then I'd come home by myself and change clothes, do the chores, and then go back and have supper with him, because Rex had cattle and he was farming, and so he had cows to milk, and I had cows to milk. So we get the milking all done and go back and have supper, and then we'd sit and watch the Ed Sullivan Show. That was our day, you know, and that was our weekend. And it happened we didn't have any money, so that was our main line of entertainment. Some of the other things we did, though, we did some kind of nutty things, because we would get up in the middle of the night. There were times when we would get up. We'd go to bed, and then we'd get up at maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, go get the car, and we'd try to drive out of the driveway real slow, because I didn't want to wake my folks up, because they'd wonder what the heck was going on, you know. Well, we'd go to town and get a root beer. That was a big deal. We'd drive into Janesville to the A&W stand. There was an A&W stand out on the east side of Janesville. We'd go, and our entertainment would be, you could get a big root beer for 10 cents. Small root beer was 5 cents. And a root beer float with all kinds of ice cream and everything was, I think, 20 or 25 cents. So we could spend 50 cents. And gas was about, 18, 20 cents a gallon, something like that. It might have been as high as 30, but most of the time it was about a quarter for a gallon of gas. So you didn't spend a lot of gas. Mm-hmm. You didn't spend a lot of money doing something like that. But I knew that if my dad heard us, he wouldn't approve of us going and spending that money, you know, because he thought that's a waste of money, you know, getting up.
Yeah.
Say, you know, kids do dumb things, you know, and so that was kind of our entertainment. Well, then Brian came along in 1955, and Leah came along in 1956, and then I think it was I'm not sure whether it was 1957 or 8 when Jim came along. Well, anyway, then I had my experience with the Lord in February of 1959, and that's where I was telling you about going into the dairy barn. Graham and I were sitting talking one Sunday afternoon about things that people. She was a Christian before I was. She knew the Lord ahead of me, and I've always been grateful, and I want to get that on record. Graham and I had our differences through our lives. We had our share of arguments. You know, when money was short, it was how are we going to pay this, and we sometimes disagreed on what should be paid. You know, but she stayed on my case for knowing the Lord, and I will forever be grateful to my wife for leading me to know the Lord Jesus Christ. And I want that out there and on record for all of eternity, that she was the one that, and her mother was a very solid Christian too, and they were both, I'm sure her mother was praying for me too. Her dad, not so much. You know, I mean, he was a typical man, you know, he just take it or leave it. You know, he could go to church or leave it. My dad had nothing to do with church. He thought the Lord, he believed in the Lord, but he